the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, coffee and cigarettes make a comeback when it is discovered that bad health and cancer get you kicked out of the alien slaver ships that have arrived in Siberia. Ebook discounts and hardcovers galore, plus we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We talk with Eric Flint and Griffin Barber this time on 1637, The Peacock Throne. This is a new book in the Ring of Fire alternate history series. This one is set in 1600s India, where the various Mughal dynasties are fighting it out to see who will occupy the Peacock Throne. And, of course, the Uptimers from West Virginia have gotten involved since they are on a mission to the east to acquire trade goods and most especially opium to ensure a supply of modern morphine and bring on the birth of modern medicine 3 centuries early. So that's coming up. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. Hey, it's the May Rubies and Rust Catherine Asaro ebook sale. To celebrate the mass market paperback publication of Catherine Asaro's The Vanished Seas, Baen eBooks has major discounts on all ebooks by Catherine Asaro. The Vanished Seas is the third book in Catherine Asaro's excellent science fiction and mystery series, featuring the tough Major Bajan, who hails from the deepest of planetary ghettos, but whose investigation into wrongdoings frequently shakes the highest levels of intergalactic empire. During May, get $2 off the ebook of The Vanished Seas and get $1 off all other Catherine Asaro ebooks, including The Bronze Skies, Undercity. These are part of the Major Bajan series, plus dollar discounts on Sunrise Alley, Diamond Star, and Carnelians. These are available wherever Baen ebooks are distributed. Sale ends May 31st, 2021 at the crack of June. And the May hardcovers are here. First is 1637, The Peacock Throne by Eric Flint and Griffin Barber. The diplomatic and trade mission from the United States of Europe came to the Mughal Empire to trade for goods and medicine, but now they are enmeshed in the Great Civil War of India's magnificent past. And out in May is Freehold Defiance, edited by Michael Z. Williamson. The UN has invaded the freehold of Grania, a bastion of libertarian government in a galaxy of authoritarianism. Grania must form an organized force from the shattered remnants of their military and from grimly determined insurgents. Their war is for their very way of life. And finally in May is the Girdle Operation by James L. Cambias. An AI must help his favorite human navigate his complex love life while aiding in the search for an ancient legendary weapon that could spell doom for men, machines, and the solar system itself. The Girdle Operation by James L. Cambias. Freehold Defiance, edited by Michael Z. Williamson. And 1637, The Peacock Throne by Eric Flint and Griffin Barber are available at booksellers everywhere. I want to welcome Eric Flint and Griffin Barber to the podcast. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Eric Flint is a modern master of alternate history fiction with more than 3 million books in print. He's the author and creator of the multiple New York Times bestselling Ring of Fire series, starting with 1632 and now a million more entries in that series. With David Drake, he wrote the six popular novels in the Belisarius alternate Roman history series, that is Eastern Roman Empire stuff. And with David Weber, he has collaborated on 1633 and 1634, the Baltic War, and that Honorverse series, Cauldron of Ghosts, and it's called Crown of Slaves, right?
Crown of Slaves. Yeah.
And the latest entry in that is going to be out next fall, which is going to be called To End in Fire, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And that is on the way. That's the next entry after It's after Cauldron of Ghost, right?
It's a direct sequel to Cauldron of Ghosts, but it also, to some degree, serves as a sequel to David's Uncompromising Honor. But mostly, it's a those two. The what was originally in Crown of Slaves a pretty separate storyline has gotten very close to the main one by now, and it's kind of hard to separate them out. So, to some degree, what's going to happen at the end in Fire will lay the basis for what David will then do with the Honor Harrington mainline.
So this novel that's coming out in fall is on the cutting edge of the Honorverse. It is the next thing that actually happens. It's not happening at the same time as anything.
Yeah, it is. It's been a challenge to write it because in times past, I normally do the first drafts, and in times past, I was working behind David in terms of the setting was already created. I then had to write, but here I'm sort of moving ahead, and that has required quite a bit of rethinking, rewriting, working through. Right now, David's taken over the manuscript as of a few days ago, and he's now working on it alone for a little while. So he can do what he wants to do in the next stage, and then I'll come back in and get it.
Good, because we need it pretty soon.
Yeah, I know. But this is, look, David Weber and Eric Flint being under deadline pressure is it's not the first time it's happened.
Well, I'm not worried about it.
Well, we'll get it. I mean,
I'm sure.
It's the thing about it that's kind of a nuisance for me is that this is the first time I've been under deadline pressure for 4 years, and I was under deadline pressure most of my career. But somehow, what happened was in 2017, the year I turned 70, I published 6 new novels. Don't ask me how I did that. The best I'd ever done prior to that was 4. And well, I got a kick out of that, though. I was like, I was 70 years old. Like, take that, you whippersnappers. But that kind of put me ahead, And so since then, I'm still writing just as much, but I just haven't been under deadline pressure until this book hit. And, well, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay, I'm not worried. So, and we'll talk about it when it comes out. Well, let me tell Griffin Barber. He spent his Eric, by the way, was for many years a labor union activist, and he lives in East Chicago, Indiana, which is near Chicago, Illinois.
Right across.
Really, the pretty part of Chicago over there near Gary.
Not exactly. Yeah. Steel mills are all here, and I remember many years ago I drove through Gary, and I remember it was at night, and I looked out at these enormous smokestacks and flames going up, and I remember thinking, who in their right mind would live here? And now I know. Excuse me, I can't turn that damn thing off. So
that's okay. Let's let it finish, though.
No, it's annoying. I wish I could, but this is the one phone I can't because the landline down there. All right.
Well, I actually have relatives in Gary, and so I've been there a few. Some of the coolies moved up there from Tennessee. They were coal miners, a coal miner clan who moved up there, and they went to work in the mills. Griffin Barber spent his youth in 4 different countries, learning 3 languages and burning all his bridges. He finally settled in Northern California with a day job as a police officer in a major metropolitan department. He lives the good life with his lovely wife, crazy smart daughter, needy dog, and indifferent cat. He is the author with Eric Flint of 1636 Mission to the Mughals. And Mughals. Okay. And
Muggles is a little too close to the Harry Potter's.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want to get sued.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get confused with. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
That was a couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing a guy who had worked at U.S. SOCOM, the military command, and I said, and he worked at U.S. SOCOM. What is that? So anyway, every once in a while, I have no idea what something says. All right, Mughals. Anyway, then that 1636 Mission of the Mughals was the prequel to this book, which is 1637, The Peacock Throne by Eric Flint and Griffin Barber, and it's now at booksellers everywhere. So since it is a follow-up to the other one, where are we in the story? Something dramatic happened at the end of the last one, and we're reaping the consequences in this one. Can one of y'all sort of set up our starting point?
Yeah, so in 2017, one of those 5 novels that Eric put out was Mission to the Mughals in 2017. Yeah.
Okay.
It might have been 16, but I'm pretty sure it's 17.
No, it wouldn't have been 16. Okay.
Yeah. So when it came out, at the end of it, there's a killing, and the throne, the Peacock Throne, which hasn't yet been constructed until this novel, is up for grabs amongst his 3 adult sons and 2 adult daughters, barely adult, and really not adult by our measure, but the 15 and ups basically are going for it to try and secure the Peacock Throne. We have the return of major characters from the Mission of the Mughals, which is the imperial family, including some of the extended family, their servants, and the uptimers who are trying to survive in this different environment for them. And they have pretty much thrown in their lot with one side, that being of our main protagonist and one of my favorite characters to write, Jahanara Begum, the eldest child of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, that built the Taj Mahal.
So tell us about the historical background that we're in here. These are Muslims, and India is controlled by these sort of satraps, right? Explain what's going on, and we're near, like, historic structures like the Taj Mahal and Red Fort. And
the Mughals are a very interesting dynasty. They actually originate from Genghis Khan, if you track it back. All of these things, Tamerlane traced his history back. I mean, there's some fudging as to how much actual genealogy was there, but that is the claim. And by this point, the Babur the Tiger was the founder of the Mughal dynasty, and he's the one who conquered northern India from Persia. And by then they were Muslims, and both in his policy, and then I believe his grandson is called Akbar the Great, who's considered the sort of greatest of Mughal emperors. They followed a policy of religious toleration. And they were Muslims. They favored Muslims, but there was no persecution of other religions. And in fact, they were very careful to stay on very good relations, particularly with the Rajputs, who are Hindus. And I use the Rajputs a lot in the Belisarius series. They were a really powerful, kind of a warrior caste. They were very definitely Hindu, though. They were not Muslim, never were. And it was very common for Mughal emperors to marry Hindu princesses who were typically Rajput. And so that was a policy they followed very carefully to keep, to keep the peace in this enormous society in terms of its population. It was one of the biggest and richest and most powerful empires in the whole world, and with a huge population and a heterogeneous population. You had Muslims, you had Hindus, you had Jains, you had, Buddhists. There weren't really any Buddhists left. You had Sikhs. And the Mughals sort of kept the peace until the Mughal prince named Aurangzeb became the emperor. He was one of the sons of Shah Jahan, the third oldest. And he's a teenager when we start the story. And Aurangzeb, in history, was one of the great emperors of the Mughal dynasty, whatever you think of him. And he ruled for decades, had an enormous impact on it. But he was religiously intolerant and insisted on imposing a kind of rigid Muslim rule. So one of the things in our series our heroes are trying to avoid is have him wind up in power, which is what happened in the real world. But our heroes, our American heroes, are supporting the oldest son, Darashiko. The central character, though, of the books is actually not an uptimers, as we call them. It's a person of the time, and it's the oldest daughter of Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan was one of the major emperors of the Mughals. He's today mostly famous because he built the Taj Mahal as a monument to his wife, who died and we love dearly. But he was a major emperor in all kinds of ways. I mean, it wasn't just simply built the Taj Mahal. And this is sort of a spoiler, but it's a book's been out for four years, so to hell with it. At the end of Lucian of Mughals, we have him assassinated. That's the big change in history that happens. And so the thing about the Mughals is, like the Ottomans, they did, and actually like a lot of kingdoms, the truth is Europe was kind of unusual in that it had a pretty rigid, established set basis of inheritance of dynasties, where it was essentially primogeniture. The oldest child in some societies had to be a son, others it could be their son or daughter, but the oldest child always inherited. And then if they weren't available, it would go down the list. That tradition did not exist in Mughal India. It did not exist among the Ottomans. It did not exist. I'm working with Griff on a different book that takes place in Central Africa. Did not exist among the Kingdom of Congo. It was just kind of, when the emperor dies, everybody fights it out, see who's going to succeed him, and which is what the Mongols did too, although they would tend to do it kind of peacefully. But so everything's up for grabs at the start of the Peacock Throne. And part of what's depicted in the novel, is the unfolding civil war between the three brothers. There were actually four brothers, but the fourth one, Murad, is like, how old is he? 10 years old, I think.
Okay. Yep.
So he's just not involved in it. And there are three daughters. The youngest is like 8 years old, and the two oldest are Jahanara and Roshana. Roshana, yeah. And the central characters, other than the American characters that come in and out, are Jahanara and a character that Griff introduced into the first book, whom I will call Salim. His full name goes on and on and on. It's like 5 different names. But Salim is an Afghan, kind of an Afghan adventurer. And he winds up getting involved in the whole middle of this. And one of the things that developed, that sort of was hinted at in Mission of the Mughals, but goes further than a hint in this book, is a romantic relationship starts developing between him and Jahanara, the oldest and by far most powerful princess in the Mughal dynasty. And this is a real no-no. I mean, that this is the kind of thing gets you trampled by elephants. And so,
because she's a pawn. No, not a pawn, but she's a important piece in this game
she is. Yeah. I mean, she's one of 7 princes and princesses of the empire, and the Mughals, starting with, I think it was Jahangir, passed a rule basically that Mughal princesses could not get married. And the reason is because they didn't want to deal with the goddamn son-in-laws. They had enough trouble dealing with sons. They didn't want to have the damn son-in-laws sticking their nose into the Civil War too.
Yeah, they did not want to dilute the potential for the pool of inheritors, so that everybody law that would not be acceptable to them. So they certainly limited the amount of people that could try and put themselves forward. And that's part of what happened after Aurangzeb passed away in 1712. He had lived a very good, long life, and that's part of the reason why the empire kind of broke up. And aside from the pressure from the English, was that he lived too long, and his sons didn't inherit, and his grandsons didn't inherit, and then his great grandsons were too young to really kind of assert themselves as emperor, and so they had to rely on and the ones who won were a pair of Afghan adventurers that ended up trying to basically dividing the empire and divide and conquer kind of manner. So it's the Lodi satrapy that went on before the Mughals invaded. There were a number of different independent Afghan-led Indian states in northern Africa, northern India, that were the people that basically Babur knocked off in order to rule, and they were all inheritors of the Indian Empire. And I always mispronounce this, Vajinagar or something like that. It's very long, and I just can't seem to wrap my head around it. Yeah, which was a very old empire and very powerful, but the Afghans had already invaded and kind of knocked it to pieces. So there's a lot of really rich, diverse history going on to use as our backdrop for this story.
So Jahanara is the sister of several of the guys, but her favorite brother, the one that she is supporting, is Dara, right?
Shiko. Yes, Dara Shiko.
He's the oldest of the brothers, yeah.
Yeah, and really, and he's had a lick on the head that's left him a little addled. And in some ways, it's really sort of Jahanara who is the power here, and she's certainly the most forceful, even though I guess it's the men that are going to rule in this day and age that we're talking about. But Jahanara's got,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the thing that Griff and I wanted to get across, I think we succeeded quite well in these books, is you've got our central character, heroine, on the one hand, lives a very constricted life. I mean, she's, women were, isolated. She has to pretty much stay in the harem. Although one of the things we try to do is depict that people's image of what harem life is one of the things these women do is play polo. I mean, polo on horseback. So it's not like they're not.
Open for the polo match.
Huh?
The book opens.
Yeah, the book opens with a polo match, and we just wanted to get across people. Look, get rid of any stereotypes you have in your mind about what Muslim princesses, immensely powerful in all kinds of ways, but who do have to live in purdah, in seclusion, in a harem. It's a complicated situation. On the one hand, there are very sharp restrictions on what they can do, and on the other hand, they are also, if they're capable, and Jahanara is really capable. They are immensely powerful. And one other character we have is her. I'm trying to think what relationship Nur Jahan was. I think her aunt.
She's her great aunt and her step grandmother.
Right. And Nur Jahan was the last and most influential wife of the Emperor Jahangir, who was the father of Shah Jahan. And she's a woman now about 60, and in her heyday, she's famous in Indian history because she basically wielded power kind of like an empress in her own right, even though, just like Jahanara, she had to stay in the harem. And, But it's just a fascinating challenge to be able to portray to readers. Yes, there are all kinds of restrictions and limitations, and to put it mildly, it's a very sexist kind of setup. But this is not a stereotype either, because these women, especially the ones who are capable, Jahanara and Nurjahan are both immensely capable. They are really powerful. And one of the things that by the end of this book, The Peacock Throne, our American characters sort of figure out is that they wish that Jahanara was the emperor of the, because she'd be better than any of these goddamn brothers of hers.
Yeah.
But that's precluded because of her position. But in practice, she wields an enormous amount of power. And then there's a complexity that I don't think we can get too far into because it'd be a big spoiler, but a twist happens in the course of this book that makes it necessary for Jahanara to get to leave for a while. So at the end of the book, she goes on a Hajj. She goes on the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. And it's funny because Griff and I had planned a different sequel to this. We do have a sequel to this, by the way. We didn't have a contract.
Yes.
But we had planned on going in one direction. And because of the way the book ended up, we realized, no, this is going to go in a very different direction. And we're going to deal a lot with the Hajj and what happens in Mecca and all kinds of stuff. And I got to say, this is a really fun story to work with. It honestly is. And we really enjoy these characters we're working with.
Well, it's got a bunch of strong women characters. In fact, part of the way you portray this and give us insight into this life is the uptimer characters, and Priscilla, she's kind of the centerpiece of that group as far as point of view that you use a lot.
Yeah.
Goes. Why are they here in the first place, and what are they after? And so, I mean, in the mainline story, for those that don't know, there's a town in West Virginia that got thrown back into time and ended up in Central Europe in what will become Germany in 1632. So we're 5 years ahead of that now, and they've come here from what has become the United States of Europe. And what are they after? What are they doing?
Well, the further incidents that are going on is a long wave of like you throw a stone in the pond, everything becomes complex and changes along that wavefront. And one of the things that's happened is it sparked a bunch of wars that are either already happening or simmering or that kind of thing. So the mission is sent out by the USC to gather saltpeter and, more importantly, opium, so that they can make painkillers for the soldiers that will be injured in these wars and continue to be injured in all these wars that have basically gone on. I don't think they've had a year of peace yet.
It's just a town that came back, right? And so they don't really have the ability to manufacture modern pharmaceuticals.
Exactly. And if they could bootstrap it, would you want to put all those resources toward that or towards making bullets or making some other,
it's also, antibiotics. It's also, it's one thing to have the knowledge. It's another thing to have the technology and the tools to make the tools to make the tools. And so, for instance, in terms of medicine, the first antibiotic that they introduce is one that most people never heard of. It's called chloramphenicol. And it's fallen out of use, but it was the first powerful antibiotic developed. And it's not natural. It's an artificial antibiotic. And the reason that we don't use it anymore, it's quite effective, is because it does have some fatal side effects. And they only affect like 1 in 50,000 people. But in today's world, that's too risky. But in a world that's got the bubonic plague in it, which this
You might-
medicine will deal with, it's like 1 in 50,000 we can live with that. But creating painkillers is difficult. And so one of the things they want to do is, get opium, because then they can make morphine, which is the simplest, one of the things. So there's a lot of things that you can make, but it would, as Griff said, it'd be kind of, you can only make so much. And do you really want to make some, or can you find something somebody else is making and you can ship in? So the reason the expedition originally goes there is basically to get, and there's a few other things they're looking for, but part of what they're being sent there for, which initially is kind of a fairly minor part of it, is just to find out what the hell's going on in India. And what happens, and the same thing in a very different way happens in a book I wrote with Ivor Cooper called The China Venture, where an expedition is sent to China. Similar kind of thing, looking for various resources. But what happens when you send these expeditions is they just start getting involved in things. And so by the time we get to the end of Peacock Throne, 2 books into this India adventure, a number of the Americans are coming back at the end of the book. They are returning. They're done, and they're returning to Europe, but some are going to stay. And their reasons for staying, in the case of Priscilla and her husband, Rodney, by now Rodney's been made a general in the Mughal army, and Priscilla is their chief medical officer, and in a different way, other characters are playing a major role. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up John and Ilsa's. Never mind. But I mean, the point is, these things take on a life of their own. And at this point, some of our American heroes don't want to go back. I mean, they're too closely involved in what's happening in India.
Well, and for one, they've kind of got the tiger by the tail. And now they're making this, and they're having this huge impact that these guys from West Virginia, this tiny mining town in West Virginia, would have never thought to have. And they can actually change the course of not only like the history that they have, but the history that they're living. Like they can actually have an effect on that, which is, to me would be enormous, both the responsibility and just like, wow, I can really, I matter. I matter this much, would be really kind of eye-opening and is a cool motivating factor for some of these characters to kind of go forward.
Priscilla's she's a medic and she knows a bunch about.
Yeah. Griff, I've forgotten her specific training. Was she a nurse?
Paramedic. She was a paramedic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's her and Rodney both were paramedic trained.
Right.
And that's one of the things that they kind of joke about is that like, we're not really doctors, but our level of training as far as effective wound treatment, that kind of stuff is so much better than as far as the eventual outcomes than the average downtimer. That it's, they're put in charge. And that's the thing about Jahanara too. She identifies talent and she identifies skill and puts it into play as a leader. It's really kind of neat to be able to play with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things it's a line I think I wrote in a different one of these books was a different one, but it was somebody said something about referred to I think it was Sharon Nichols, who's one of the major characters of the series, whose father's a doctor. She was trained as a nurse. And somebody refers to her as a doctor, and somebody says, well, she's a nurse, and the person says, yeah. And unlike 17th century doctors, she cannot recite at great length in Greek and Latin the writings of Aristotle on medicine. But if you got to have something taken care of, I really suggest you go talk to her and not one of these learned fellows who's going to bleed you.
Dust your humors.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, Priscilla's has sewn up the head of security for Jahanara's harem, right? Is that
Yes.
Yeah.
beginning of the book, and basically save this incredible warrior's life.
Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing is, if those figures behind Griff in the cover,
Mm-hmm.
these are well, the guy in the middle is an American, but the two on either side, these are there were women warriors that the Mughal princes had as bodyguards, and they were they Afghan? I think they were.
No, well, they were drawn from everywhere. There was an Armenian that's mentioned, which the Armenian Turkic warrior tribes. Basically, they were hired on as guards for the harem, not necessarily for the princesses, but for the harem.
Yeah, there was.
They would not be a danger to make use of the harem and get the harem pregnant, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were safer. They were safer than even the eunuchs, and they were less expensive for the harem security, and they could be trusted within certain parameters far more than anybody else. So there's concentric rings of security around the harem. And that is certainly the innermost security for that.
Yeah, it's a tradition goes way back. I ran into it originally in the Belisari series, and the tradition goes back to a tribe known as the Sarmatians from Central Asia, who by legend, how much of this is true, nobody's ever really quite been able to figure out. But the legend is that they had, Amazons, that they had women warriors, and that it sort of continued on. But there's enough of it that I mean, we didn't make this up. This is, these ladies.
That was in 1652 or so. Aurangzeb had already defeated his brothers in battle repeatedly, but Shah Jahan was trying to broker a peace and invited his sons to come and visit with him and negotiate a peace to settle the war, which had dragged on for quite some time. But Aurangzeb always beat everybody. And Aurangzeb said and entertained this, in front of his advisors. He said, I'm being invited into Shah Jahan's harem to discuss peace. And all of his advisors uniformly said, don't do it. He'll set his women upon you and they will kill you. And he didn't do it because of that advice. So clearly they were a threat. Like, it wasn't any kind of joke that they were, these were not warriors that they had to worry about. And so we kind of took that. One of the nice things, about working within this harem stuff is that we have a lot of European opinion on it, which is mostly salacious. They concentrated on that kind of thing. But then we also have just these little tidbits, these little insights, and you can extrapolate from there. But because only the princesses wrote about what it was like inside the harem, and no one else did. Everyone else kind of rumor mongered or, said they were there and watched when they obviously weren't. There's a lot of room to play around with that and speak about that. So there's a few scholarly things that have gone on within the study of the harems. But yeah, there was a lot of room to play with how that relationship would work. And one of the things that we did and consciously did was that, we have this inherently misogynistic system in place that, this could be a real slog if we only focused on that aspect of it. But people are people no matter where you put them, and they're going to figure out ways to overcome, enhance, and improve their lives in any circumstance. So being able to do that with these characters was a lot of fun. And also, given enough stress, any system will start to show its cracks. And those cracks, for a sufficiently intelligent and motivated individual, are opportunities for change. So we wanted to make sure we kind of did that as well.
Yeah. Well, you have, I mean, and I mean, clearly harem life is complex. You have, for instance, Dara's wife begging him to marry some more women so that, because, for one thing, it will secure her place as first wife, right? And also she for his own strength to form alliances, right? And
yeah, to secure his throne.
I guess it's
And
separate from the harem, but still, it's
yeah.
the same sort of like, give us some other women, man. That's
Well, I mean, and that's literally the purpose of it, was to, to protect his wives from other men's eyes and touch. But the key is that it was, those political alliances made by marriage were essential, or viewed as essential by the previous kings and emperors of India. So yeah, it's a big deal that he's not. And for the motivation that he has for not doing it's kind of unclear. But Jahanara is like, okay, well, and it poses problems for Jahanara too, because she's viewed as being kind of usurping the mandate that Nadira should hold. Nadira, as first wife and as only wife, should be the one who's in charge of all of the court of the harem, and she's not, because Jahanara's got her hand in there, but with Nadira's blessing, because Nadira is like, I can recognize my talents, and your talents are a lot greater than mine or my husband's. So please make sure you take care of business.
Because if this group loses, they're going to be dead.
And their children are dead too. That's the other thing, is that Nadira recognizes that
they're playing for very, very high stakes. And it's a very, it's an unforgiving environment. It's not as bad historically as the Ottoman Turk tradition, where that was really rough as far as the successions went. They had the same kind of issues among the Mughal Indians, but the Ottomans, the problem with the Ottoman tradition is the sultans didn't get married. Their wives were their women were slave women, and once one of them had a child, she was then secluded. She'd have one child, and that would be it, because they didn't want to build up too much power and influence on the part of any one woman. But what the problem was, that you wound up with a whole bunch of princes whose mothers were all slaves. They weren't. They didn't have the kind of stature or status that princes have in the Mughal Empire. So the Ottomans, Jesus, whenever there had to be a succession, there was going to be a civil war. I mean, it was just the way it was, and the brothers were going to basically fight it out until there was one of them left. And I had never really realized until we started doing the research on this, just because you tend to think of the European system as kind of what everybody does, but it's actually not true. The Europeans, I don't know where they developed it, but they developed very early on this system of primogeniture, which is, it's a very clear rules and everybody follows it, that the oldest son of the king becomes the new king. And if there's no son, then the oldest daughter, although the French had the Salic law where it had to be a man, it couldn't be a woman. But still, it was basically the oldest child. And then you would go down through the list. If the oldest died, it wasn't available. And then if you ran out of kids, then you'd go to the oldest brother, and then you go through his children. But there were definite, clear set rules, which meant that even the Europeans had a jillion succession crises. I mean, there's the War of the Austrian Succession and the War of the Spanish Succession. Even in Europe, successions tended to get rocky, but it was nothing compared to what it was like in among the Indians, and among the Ottoman Turks. And then one of the things that Griffin and I discovered, I hadn't known that because we're doing this book that's set in Central Africa. Central African kingdoms were the same way. It was, actually they were even more complicated because
Yeah.
They didn't actually have clear dynasties. They had these lineages, these houses that would compete with each other. So it was a little bit more like the situation of the Venetian oligarchy. But yeah, it's in fact one of the things that happened in Africa is that the Congolese would send envoys to the papacy because they had converted to Catholicism, and they tried to get the Pope to establish primogeniture as the rule in Congo. And the Pope wouldn't do it, basically because from the European point of view, it was to their advantage really to have
It was the Portuguese, it was to the Portuguese advantage to be able to pick it out. Yeah.
This kind of chaos. So they didn't want to have.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it has to do with Islamic inheritance law, and juridic precedence within that is part of the reason why there's no primogeniture. But yeah, it's kind of mind bending for most of us. But the one thing that the Mughals did different than the Ottomans was every son that reached adulthood or left the harem was given greater and greater responsibility and governorships and that kind of thing as they went along, and they were able to recruit their own people. They were given a salary out of the government fund, and they were with that salary they were supposed to pay their own people, and so they were able to if somebody was in opposition to the emperor, they were able to kind of subvert that opposition to the emperor into support for the royal family by saying, hey, come work for me. And they did this repeatedly against the Rajputs and that kind of thing, was they would, and the Sikhs as well, eventually, they would go ahead and, the emperor would be at war with them. They'd get conquered. They'd be kind of restive and resistant. And the prince would be like, hey, guys, I'd really like you on my staff, and I'll pay you a boatload of money to be on my staff and help me out in ruling your area or maybe some other area of the empire. And we'll get along just snazzy. And when I become emperor, you'll be my right-hand man. So they constantly refreshed both the pool of talent around the princes, but also the princes themselves were being trained how to rule and how to, not necessarily play favorites, but certainly gather the best talent around them, because they knew that eventually they were going to have to go to war against the others. And that's one of the things in the Peacock Throne that really comes home to roost, is that in Mission to the Mughals, Darashiko lost his best talent, like all the people that he had gotten around him that had grown up with him. His milk brothers is what they're called, because they were raised by the same wet nurses in the harem. These guys that were really, really loyal to him, they all got smoked by the Sikhs. So in the battle in Mission to the Mughals. So now he's kind of having to rebuild, and he's got this TBI that he accrued at the end of Mission as well. Spoiler alerts, folks. Sorry, it's been 4 years. You can, deal with it. But so he's got he has a long slope to kind of go up. And Jahanara is, because she's in such close proximity with him and knows his mind generally, to be very liberal relative to his younger brothers, much more a supporter of other religions than Islam, even sects within Islam, not just Sunni and Shia, but also the dervishes and all the different groups that sprang up in India in that contact zone between Indian Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, all these other religions that sprang out of India. They were able to kind of synergistically rule them and get the best talent. Because again, if you're talking about somebody who comes in, it's a little bit like the Romans, but it's actually a better system than the Romans, in as much as people have much more buy-in when your individual leaders, after they got beat up, they're put back on their feet and they're told, hey, you're going to work with this kid of mine and you're going to be the next generation. It may not happen now, but you're going to be the next generation of rulers. It's like, well, why wouldn't I buy into that? Especially with the technology and stuff that they had. Yeah. That's one of the funnest things about this was in combining it with the 1632 universe, was going to say the emperor, in the Mission of the Mughals, they go to Shah Jahan and they go, hey, we've got all these wonders. And he's like, I don't need your wonders. We got plenty of people doing those jobs, and you'll put them out of work. That would destabilize my empire. Why would I want that? And then in this one, in the Peacock Throne, we have they're not to spoil things, but they're given an exemplar of something, and they mass produce it in a shockingly short amount of time.
Well, I mean, we should talk about this because it's very important in the book, and we learned pretty early on that and what it is guns, right?
Yes.
And so it is something the uptimers have with them, and it's something that they, it's what makes them pretty powerful as an ally, right? And unless your entire gunpowder factory blows up,
right,
or seems to.
And that's So the thing about it too is that they're not lugging around crates of guns. They bring an exemplar. It's actually my brother and I have my great grandfather's shotguns. We have a matched pair of them. He's got one, I have the other. And I was like, this wouldn't be one of the things that these uptimers would have brought with them to use in combat, but it would certainly be something they would use as a fowling piece while they're in India. They would go out and probably use it. So, they give this exemplar to the Atishbaz, the caste that is involved in gunsmithing and Talawat. They give it to him, or he asks for it, and he's looking at the semi-automatic 45s and all this other stuff, and he's like, that's all well and good, but he focuses in on this L.C. Smith shotgun and how he can make something. And mentioned it earlier before we started recording, but Rick Boatwright is not only a good IT guy for Eric, he's also a college or high school level chemistry and science teacher. So he's been able to explain to me he was explaining to me how we could do this and that kind of thing. I consulted with a couple of gunsmith friends of mine and would it be feasible, that kind of thing. And also with some special operators that, indicated that, yes, the apocryphal story of the Afghans making AK-47s is actually true. They can actually do that now. So it certainly would be easy for them to copy a double barrel break shotgun from the early or the late 19th century. They would certainly be able to copy that very, very quickly. The stalling point of the difficulty would be ammunition. So, and yes, the ammunition plant and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of fun to be had with that.
One of the things that I found that I'm not sure about Europeans, but Americans often don't know a lot of history, and they make assumptions. And one of the assumptions is that Europeans developed gunpowder and gunpowder weapons, and it actually migrated into Europe through Central Asia. So these people have been working with guns for a long time, and especially cannons. And gunpowder warfare has been around for a long time before our story starts. It's just what the uptimers bring is, where people like this character that Griff's talking about can see in their hands, okay, I see what they're doing here. But they already had the skill levels to do stuff. I mean, it's not like you had to teach them everything by any means. In fact, there's one part in the book where I forgot, Griff, you wrote this part, but it's where I think it's Adisha just kind of somewhat huffily says, "We know how to make guns. Thank you very much." Right. Butt out, and because we've been making them for many generations now. Get the fuck out of here. And I really love working in this series.
Yeah.
The 17th century is just, it's funny, until I started the series, it was not a period of history. I knew some about it, but not a whole lot. But since then, I've become something of an expert on the whole century, not just in Europe, but all over. And it's just God, it's a great period.
Yeah. The fun thing about that was those having those conversations, because one of the things that this allows us to do is to show that hubris, to show that we as North Americans or Anglo-Saxon European people tend to think we're on top of things, and we've kind of always been. But like one of my very first stories or my first sale actually to the Granville Gazette was the Swiss, and it was a Frenchman talking about those backward English, because at the time they were really backward relative to the rest of Europe.
Yeah, they were considered rubes.
Yeah, literacy rates, everything was just not what it was anywhere else.
The reason all those guys wanted to get the hell out of there and get over to America. Who wants to live on that little dirt clod riddled island? Well, so all right, so there's actual complex humans in the past, yes, we know, but being able to actually write them is something a little different than just saying it, isn't it? Yeah. So what about the bad guys, who are also complex humans and have very different sort of motives? There is Aurangzeb and his folks, who are we referred to him so far, and there's an arrayed sort of alliance of traders from Europe who are like the English traders, as with the D, traders, Portuguese there, and there's some priests who are trying to tell us a little bit about the melange of the bad guys. They're not really bad guys, but they do want to kill our good guys. So,
yeah, the antagonists, yes, certainly. Yes. So the Portuguese Goa is a thing at this time. They had it's the one state that they actually carved out for themselves in the East. Everywhere else, it was just like an enclave or a trading area that they held sway over.
Go ahead. I'll be right back.
Okay. They would hold on to small areas, but Goa was actually the seat of the Viceroy of India, the Estado de India. So basically, he was responsible for everything west of the Cape, the Horn of Africa, or the Cape of Africa, I should say. And they were constantly understaffed, especially in the 17th century in this particular era, because the Spanish kind of viewed the Portuguese Empire as their bastard stepchild. They did not allot a lot of resources to it. So they were constantly undermanned. And then the people that showed up to be soldiers were often recruited into the Jesuits or one of the other religious orders upon their arrival in Goa. They had just were leaking so much manpower throughout the entire 17th century, basically, and were suffering as a cause of it. So they hear of the events at the end of the mission to the Mughals and decide that it's time to, they need to pick a side. They might be able to get some advantage out of picking the right side. And they start to negotiate or approach the different princes, but they kind of settle on Aurangzeb as the prince they should back, because at the end of Mission of the Mughals, the two younger brothers had been dispatched into the Deccan to conquer it at the head of really big armies. But the Deccan had been suffering from a decade-long drought and famine, as well as the numerous wars that were going on. And so there's a really heavy logistics chain. So the Portuguese and the English, who have been forced out of the Mughal Empire proper by Shah Jahan's actions and or responses to certain actions taken against him, have because he learned that what the English did to India in our actual tap.
Another thing that's very interesting, because they've a lot of the history and the encyclopedias and the history books have been translated and have gotten there, and so some of the main characters know what the history was.
Yes.
And they've seen themselves in those histories.
Yes, and that's the reason why Shah Jahan ultimately is assassinated at the end of Mission of the Mughals, is because he is trying to change that history. And the people that aren't aware of it just see him trying to undermine Islam in the empire and decide that he's got to go if he's going to do that. The zealots that are there. So Aurangzeb is approached by basically the bishop of Goa and the English, basically the viceroy and the bishop of Goa. They combine together to bring in the English, and then they approach Aurangzeb with offers of logistical support if he favors them when he becomes emperor. And so they send their mission to him with this deal, and eventually something is ironed out. But there's also the Shah Shuja, the middle son, is between and around them. So there's a lot of back and forth with regard to who they should support, and also because of the way that the court is situated, and Aurangzeb being the youngest prince and being at the farthest extent of the logistics train, he's not willing to immediately go, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll be your emperor. I'll be your guy in India. He has to play it cagey, and there is some impatience amongst the Portuguese, the viceroy, and in particular the religious aspect of it, with this kind of diminishing returns for what they're giving him. He doesn't seem to be making forward motion in good faith. So there's a lot of pressure there. And it also allows us to give a European context to what's going on in Aurangzeb and Shah Shuja's camp as they kind of continue north. While we did have some of Aurangzeb's, if we did have a lot of Aurangzeb's thoughts or point of view, I didn't want to do that all the way through. Like it was better to have some kind of outsider's viewpoint on what was going on for a lot of the events, because that's a better translation for the reader.
So often in the Ring of Fire books, Eric will end up writing the battles. Is that and Aurangzeb is coming for Dara and Jahanara, even at a slow pace or at a reflective pace, and he's hearing things. He's got spies, and there's all kind of cool like ciphers in this as well, which there's all kind of cool spying going on. So how did the battle? All right, so and there's the Red Fortress, right? And this is the short structure.
In this book, there's a great big, really big pitch battle at the end, and actually Griffin, he wanted to, and he's like, "Go ahead." And I was very, very pleased with it. Battle scenes are not easy to do. People think they are, but they're not. And Griff did a great job with it. So I think I tweaked here or there, did something, but pretty much it's what he wrote. And it's a big battle. I mean, it goes on. I mean, it's a siege with a battle combined with it. But I was very happy with it. I was very pleased with it. I think it's the strength of the book. And like I said, if I were giving a class to people, I could try to explain to them why people think battles are going to be easy to do and they're not. The basic problem people do, and they do with fight scenes too, is they write them as if they were Howard Cosell announcing a boxing match with this kind of, from the top down, oh yeah, they just picked everything, and it's just what you want coming out of a battle scene is chaos, and it's the emotion of it that grabs a reader. It's not, and then they went to the left, and then they went to the right. I mean, that's not particularly interesting. What really grips readers is feeling like they're right smack in the middle of this goddamn thing. And there's a big chunk of the battle that Griff wrote where the woman warrior, Anisha, gets separated and she winds up in really hairy place, but manages to come out of it, survive. And that's the kind of thing that really grips people, is where you feel you're right with the characters, and you don't necessarily have a good sense of the battle as a whole. Parts of it, maybe you'll get a little bit of that, but a lot of it you just don't, especially until toward the end where, one of the generals says, well, I guess we kind of lost this one.
And that's one of the things about even, all these changes that have been induced in warfare by the occurrence of the uptimers. They haven't really enhanced command and control on the tactical level. They've gotten it on the strategic level, but certainly not on the tactical level. And I've been in a lot of fights individually, and I know that it's really hard to know what's going on 10 feet away from you, let alone what's going on 100 yards, 200 yards, a mile, all that kind of thing. So one of the things that, I always try and do in any kind of combat scene that I write, but in particular in battle scenes. And we were talking earlier, I think before we started recording, about your work with The Chosen, Tony, and that kind of stuff. Is that one of the things that always gripped me about those was that it was always, there's this macro level of like a commander kind of knowing what's going on, or hoping he knows what's going on, trying to feel him out and getting reports and that kind of thing. And then there was always the micro level. It was the guy who was getting shot at. And that's the human story. The armies clashing is all well and good, but the human story is at the grunt level, and you can have that with a general who puts themselves forward and is in the combat themselves, but you're much more likely to have it in guys that are like, what am I doing here? And one of the fun things that we did with this was the Sikhs being there, and Bidi Chand, this hero of the disciples of sixth Guru Hargobind Singh, he's just like this nut. They're looking at him like, man, that guy is just crazy. And they're like, well, I'm glad somebody else has got a man crush on him, because he's also really magnetic, and they're like, wow, look at Conan go. And that was one of the things, is that I have literally looked across at somebody else, another officer who was struggling to overcome the resistance of a suspect who was incredibly violent, and gone, wow, they're just awesome. And thinking that, that they really have good control, and they know what they're doing, that kind of thing. And so to the weird things you think in combat, they happen. So yeah, that was one of the things about this big battle. And again, being an admirer of Eric's work as well, in the Belisarius series, and with Drake as well, being seated in the characters and giving a damn about what's going on, you have to kind of be in that zone where you're telling enough, but you're showing a lot more. Mm-hmm. And I've always had an interest in the human cost of violence, and I think that we kind of cover that to a great extent in this, and we will continue to do so in the next book that we're working on.
It's a lot of fun. It is 1637, The Peacock Throne by Eric Flint and Griffin Barber, and it's at booksellers everywhere. Griff and Eric, thank you so much for joining us and talking with us about The Peacock Throne.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization. But the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's league are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage, Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
HMS Duke of Cromarty in hyperspace.
Skipper, I realize we're in a hurry, but Her Majesty's going to be really, really pissed if we break the Duke. You do realize that, don't you? And I don't know about you, but I don't like it when Her Majesty is pissed at me.
Captain Stephen Firestein looked up from his mug of coffee at Commander Rice. The commander looked back, and his expression showed rather more genuine concern than his tone had.
I don't plan on breaking anything, Alex,
he said mildly.
People don't usually plan on things like that,
Rice pointed out.
It just sort of happens. Especially when you've pulled the governors on the hypergenerator. I seem to remember reading somewhere that that's what you might call a bad idea. I have total confidence in your ability to keep everything on the green,
Firestein said.
And if it should happen that my confidence is misplaced, the Empress's temper is likely to be the last thing you'll have to worry about.
Rice looked remarkably unreassured.
Skipper, he said in a much more serious tone, if we pick up a harmonic this high in the theta bands, there's no tomorrow. And we're right on the edge of bouncing off the iota wall. My systems are in good shape, but I'd be lying if I said I felt anything like confident about the way we're stressing them. Understood.
Firestein took a long, slow sip of coffee, then lowered the cup.
Understood, but we're not backing off. Sir, you've made your point, Alex, but we're not backing off.
Firestein shook his head.
I understand what you're saying, and the truth is I tend to agree, but there's too much riding on this.
Rice couldn't quite keep the skepticism out of his expression, and in some ways, Firestein didn't blame him. If Empress Elizabeth's personal yacht hit the iota wall, it was unlikely there'd be any survivors. But Rice hadn't been party to Firestein's sickbay conversation. He didn't understand the implications, the reason Firestein was determined to set a new record for the Beowulf Sol run. He was going to shave every second he could off that passage, and if that meant hazarding his command, so be it. There were some people you didn't fail, and Stephen Firestein was not going to be the one who failed this time.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz and a Bengal tiger-colored Cadillac DeVille with peacock feather-lined seats and a pink siren on top. And gratitude and praise for Eric Flint and Griffin Barber, authors of 1637, The Peacock Throne. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.